Not my mother's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What have you got to be sorry about? My mother, don't waste your time. She ditched us when I was 11 and ran off with some hotel man in the East. You know what a mother's love is.
Yes, I do.
You mean it's better to be ditched?
No, I think it's better to be loved. Don't you ever see her?
I don't know where she is. Well, maybe I ought to go join the other children.
This is, of course, a major scene in Alfred Hitchcock's film, The Birds. Up until this point in the film, Melanie Daniels has largely been arch, clever, smug, arrogant. Ultimately, someone who seems more interested in playing a practical joke than in having an authentic connection with anyone. However, here we learn, as she confesses to Mitch, her burgeoning love interest, that there's a deep pain within her, a deep sense of abandonment, of loneliness. And that abandonment is what drives her desire for any kind of connection, even if it's a kind of light, socialite connection, or her desire for any kind of power. And we can imagine that her smugness and arrogance also therefore grows out of her feeling of deep pain and inadequacy in relationship to her mother. Well, Melanie is only one of many characters in The Birds who is driven by deep loneliness. We can also think of Mitch's mother, Lydia, who on several occasions makes it quite clear that she is extremely threatened by Melanie because she fears that Melanie will come between her and her son Mitch, on whom she relies heavily since her husband died a few years back. Well, just as in this scene with Melanie and Mitch, there seems to be a kind of breakthrough for Melanie where she breaks through the blindness that her loneliness has caused to a kind of insight into what generates the loneliness. We see a similar scene between Lydia and Melanie when Lydia confesses to Melanie while she's lying in her bed after having seen the farmer with his eyes gouged out, lying there in bed, exhausted, nervous, scared. She says to Lydia, she says to Melanie, I wish I were stronger. I wish I had my strength. And she talks about her loneliness. In other words, she's very vulnerable. And she calls Melanie by her first name for the first time in that scene. So that vulnerability allows her to connect, it appears, to Melanie. Yet again, someone who overcomes the kind of blindness caused by her extreme loneliness, so a sort of insight into the value of vulnerability and connecting with other people. We could also talk about Mitch in this regard. He himself is like Melanie early in the film, very arrogant, very smug. He seems to be rather cold and aloof, not only toward Melanie, but toward almost everyone in the film. That seems to be his primary characteristic. But of course, as the film goes on, he has to take care of his household. And we see him using great ingenuity and great courage to try to combat the birds, to keep the birds away from those he loves. So Mitch himself lets down his reserve as the film goes on. Now, this idea of characters moving from a kind of blindness to insight, the blindness caused by extreme loneliness, to insight into ways that one might connect authentically with another, this seems to be reinforced by the imagery of the film. And for instance, there are images of blindness. The farmer, of course, has his eyes pecked out by the birds. When the children are running from the school down the street, one child has his glasses knocked off by a bird and they are cracked on the pavement. Both these images suggesting, of course, the inability to see well. And furthermore, it's a film that is very keen on the imagery of windows. We, of course, have birds constantly breaking into windows. We can think of Melanie trapped inside the telephone booth and the glass windows being cracked there. We can think of any number of scenes where characters are trying to protect themselves with windows, but the windows are unsuccessful in protecting them. Again, another image of a a vehicle normally used for clear seeing, clear glass, is not successful. But all of these seeming moments of insight with Melanie and Mitch, with Melanie and Lydia, with Mitch sort of in general, are ultimately ironic, because by the time we get to the end of the film, any sort of insight Melanie might have gained seems to be utterly obliterated by the extreme trauma she undergoes when she's attacked by all the birds in the attic. She's left silent, comatose almost, unable to speak, perhaps even unable to feel. And of course, we see all Lydia and Kathy and Mitch as they make their way out of their house, making their way toward maybe San Francisco to get Melanie help. The birds are hovering, they're gathering, they could attack at any moment, killing them, obliterating any kind of human insight they might have gained. So unlike, say, a traditional drama where characters gain insight and their insight gives them a sense of power and meaning, in this film, any insight is potentially obliterated by the birds, who care nothing for human insight, and mindlessly attack and kill. So any knowledge learned will ultimately be for naught. There is a glimmer of hope, however, at the end of The Birds. We see in the horizon, as the car drives off, light breaking through clouds, traditionally a symbol of hope. And we see Melanie lean her head lovingly on the arm of Lydia, suggesting that Melanie has found a mother, the lost mother, and that Lydia has found another child that will be reliant upon her, and that will keep her from feeling so lonely. But even these two glimmers are ambiguous at best. The film itself does not end with the traditional words on the screen, the end. It doesn't end at all. It simply keeps going, we can imagine. Other things will happen. There's no aesthetic closure. So these moments of seeming hope could well just be only that, mere ephemeral glances of potential hope that could of course be obliterated at any moment if those birds hop off those wires and attack that convertible car with that flimsy white top.